Hey, welcome to the Relentless Positivity Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Martin. So my guest today, she had a life where she suffered from chronic pain, but she took that life and turned it into a mission to help others avoid that fate and thrive instead. So Sarah Cummins, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Glad to be
Oh,
here.
oh, absolutely. So let's take it back. So where did you grow up and what were you interested in as a kid?
All right. I grew up in a small town in Kansas. I love to read. I was an avid reader. We had a small library. I think I read every book in there. And back then, you didn't have the opportunity to get books from nearby libraries and have them interlibrary loans. So Um, today I still am an avid reader. I'm often reading 4 or 5 books at a time on different subjects, learning things, but also just enjoying reading. I like that ability to experience someone else's life through words.
Yeah, you think about someone's entire life history, you can read it in a few hours, right? I mean, you can learn every lesson they learned in a whole lifetime of 80 years or something like that. Why wouldn't you be a reader? They say readers are leaders. That's what you got to tell the kids out there. So think about your child. What's one of your favorite childhood memories from growing up?
I think all of my really special memories were with my grandparents. My mom's parents, we were very close. And so I would spend weekends with them, have overnights with my cousins. And, it was an opportunity, I guess, to um, play and have fun and get spoiled. And I think, my grandparents are very interactive with us. So we played games and we went on walks and I learned a lot from them. So those moments I definitely cherish. My grandmother died of cancer in her mid 60s, I believe. And then my grandfather died actually just a few years ago. We were stationed in Wichita at the time and got to go to his funeral. So that was um, a special ability because being military, I missed a lot of family funerals over the years.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. So um, kind of a 180 from that. What's something that made you laugh recently?
Well, much better than funerals. Let's see. Um, I just got a kitten and I haven't had a pet in several years. So the kitten, I mean, he makes me laugh every day. They're just full of energy. It kind of makes me remember how we used to play as kids and had all this spunk. And, the older we get, the less we remember how to just play and be free.
Well, yeah, that's true. We don't play enough, do we? That's what keeps you young. You got to keep you young. So what's the kitten's name?
We adopted him from the Humane Society. My son and I volunteer there here in Huntsville, and we volunteer in the cat room because we both love cats. And we've been kind of looking for that special one. He actually is, I think, a Maine Coon mix, so he's very unique looking, and he wouldn't have lasted at the Humane Society for very long. He would have been adopted right away. So luckily we volunteered that day that he was in there. We held him and he was playful, but also cuddly and super cute. And they named him General Fluffington, which is quite a mouthful. My son loves the name, calls him General, and he wants to have like a whole cat army, like Lieutenant and Colonel, and Captain. But I'm just for one cat right now. So we actually started calling him Rocket for several reasons. He shoots between your legs like a rocket and tries to trip you. We also live in the Rocket City, and and then and in addition to that, he looks like a trash panda. So I thought, why not call him Rocket?
That's pretty amazing. I like the general name. That's a pretty awesome name.
Yeah,
My dog he came with a name too, so he's got a sir in front of his name. So sometimes they give him little titles in there. So um,
I like it.
so those main are those the big ones? He's gonna be like a big fluffy one. Is that the main
He
coon?
Yeah, he's only a few months old and he has humongous paws, but he's got like little floopies out of his ears. He's
Oh
super
yeah,
cute.
they said those are kind of like dogs. Those cats kind of like a little bit like dogs, don't they?
Yeah, yep.
Okay,
And
yeah,
they get really big and they're very smart cats.
yeah. You mentioned the military a little bit. So how did you and your husband meet?
So actually I met my husband when I was 16. I was an ornery teenager, and as I mentioned, I lived in a small town. There wasn't a lot to do except get into trouble. And so we met at a party, and we've been together really, other than military deployments and training, we've been together for 26, 27 years. I mean, a long time. Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty cool. So, I mean, he was an Air Force, career Air Force guy, but how did his career kind of lead into your chronic pain?
So we got married when I was young. I was 20. We moved to Virginia and then to Germany. It wasn't until we returned back to the United States. We'd been married for several years. I was 28 when I got pregnant with my son, and we had um, kind of a tumultuous time. The time my son was supposed to be born, he was supposed to be deployed, and he deferred deployment to be there for me when I had the baby. I was kind of like, you got me into this, now you're going to help me get out of this. um, and so he deferred deployment, but then he left when our son was 4 months old, and he returned right before he turned a year. So he missed all of the first. It was extremely stressful for me because I'm kind of an anxious personality, or at least I was then. And so when I had my son, I was pretty much alone. My son didn't sleep great, which means I didn't sleep great.
Oh,
Yeah, I was stressed because he was deployed during the time. Well, both times he deployed, Saddam Hussein was captured and Osama bin Laden. So you know, the craziness happens over there after they catch them. They all kind of all go nuts. And so I didn't want to hear the news. I didn't want to talk to people about it. I was always waiting to hear, you know, if he was okay or where he is or when he could call next. And you know, I hate kind of creating a story around that framework, because back then, you know, in World War I, World War II, and so on, you couldn't communicate with your loved one for months at a time. You'd wait to get that letter. And so I'm super grateful. He's a calm guy, and we had all the communication that we did, but it holds a lot of stress and anxiety in your body. And I think over time, with sleep deprivation, I was just not having time to take care of myself. And so I started getting a lot of chronic symptoms. I would see the physicians and specialists, and they would all be like, "You're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. Here's a pill." And I was just not willing to take a pill, especially being a single parent, to know that, you know, I might pass out on the couch and not be there for him when he needs me. It didn't seem like an opportunity, and it was just something to put a band-aid on the real problem. So my yoga experience was pretty slim. I did yoga and things like that on my own since my 20s, but it was very sporadic practice. And I was really reaching for spirituality and for God, praying a lot, you know, help me find an answer so that I can, you know, be more present. And I reached back into the yoga roots and kind of started studying that. And the more opportunity I had to go to a yoga class, the more, I always say, God was kind of implanting these little signs, you know, like, hey, you should go to this yoga, you should meet this person,
yeah.
you should, you know, go to this class. And it kind of led people to, I guess, be watching me in yoga class and saying, hey, we want you to be our teacher. Like you're the person that we're looking towards every time you come to class. And so something I never thought of doing, I actually started thinking about this. Like my son was getting older, my husband was around more. There was an opportunity for me to take care of me and think about, what do I want to be when I grow up and when my child doesn't need me every day anymore? And so I went to teacher training, and I started to really feel, the more I practiced, the more I learned yoga philosophy, the more I started to feel like I have control over my health and I have the ability to heal myself when given the opportunity to step away and focus on my own healing. And so that changed a lot of things. It changed the way I, of course, was sleeping better. My husband wasn't deployed anymore. It was better circumstances, but I was taking time to work with finding friends, finding community, finding people who understood what I was going through. And I think community was a huge part of my healing as well. And so despite the fact that being a military spouse was very difficult, very challenging, very stressful, I think we need those challenges sometimes to be able to learn from them and to grow from them. So I very much have a growth mindset, but the more that I started working with myself, the more I started attracting clients to me who had similar issues, which I also think is a God thing. He gave me those experiences so that I would know how to help them and other people. And so my own healing gave me the capability of helping others to heal too. And it just became my passion. I love teaching people what I had to learn the hard way myself.
Yeah. I mean, who better to guide someone through it than someone's actually been through it themselves? It's not something they read about in a textbook or they heard it works. This is what I did, and I can help you do the same. So you're the perfect person for that. And, sometimes you got to go through these hard things to be able to help someone like that. So I'm glad you're using your pain for a purpose. So, so tell people what the name of your business is and how you came up with that name. I think that's a pretty cool story.
Thanks. Yeah, my business is Waterfall Yoga Therapy. So back in 2013, my husband and I started to think about, what are we going to do when this part of our life is over and we're done moving every couple of years? And so we really loved Alabama. Shockingly, I was surprised that we loved it as much as we did, but we were stationed in Montgomery quite a bit. And when we left Montgomery, we both said that felt like home. And so I think it kind of propelled this idea that maybe we retire in Alabama. We knew Montgomery wasn't really the place for us. So we started looking in Huntsville area because my husband's an engineer, and this is like engineer mecca, cyber mecca. And my son has very much an engineering mind too. So in addition, Huntsville is much more progressive and maybe even more so now because we've had such an influx of new people from other parts of the country. But when we were looking for property up here, we had a real estate agent and we kind of shopped all over the place. We actually landed upon this piece of land on the last day. We were like done. We couldn't look at anything else. And it was fate. I mean, we turned a corner, we went down this road we hadn't turned down yet. There was a for sale sign. It had been raining and literally everything but angels singing. The clouds parted, the sunshine down on this valley floor, 360-degree view of the Hurricane Valley. And we could hear water running. So I thought it was a stream. We put an offer on the property, and as all the paperwork was happening, the real estate agent came out and hiked the property. And she was like, "Did you know there's a full-blown waterfall on the property?" And we're like, "No." So she took pictures of it. Just so happened the acreage that we had purchased had this natural waterfall. And so at the time I was getting my LLC and trying to figure out what am I going to name my business. And my husband's like, "Well, if this is where we're going to land and this is where we want to spend the rest of our life, what about Waterfall Yoga?" And so my business, eventually I went to yoga therapy training and became a yoga therapist, became Waterfall Yoga Therapy. And it was in my training, actually. I was in an ashram in Austin, and my teacher, Durga, she teaches yoga for recovery and addiction. She had us in a sanctuary meditation. So sanctuary meditation is where you go to a safe place within, and you kind of imagine the sight, sound, smells, the touch. And I was there meditating next to a waterfall. And I had done this 1,000 times over my lifetime, is going to this waterfall. And I realized that as a child, I had written stories about waterfalls, poetry, drawn pictures. My mom still has all that stuff. And my whole body just goes, "Oh my gosh," like law of attraction or God thing or all of that into a one with a pretty little bow. I had attracted that waterfall, and God had gifted me that, I think, maybe to tell me that that this was your path, this is your purpose. And so it was just kind of this astounding moment where I knew I've made the right choices and I'm on the right path.
Wow. Nothing like some good God checking that box, like, hey, you're going the right direction. So my
Yeah.
story is very similar. I came up with a very creative name for my LLC. So I'm a fitness guy. So my name is Joe Martin. Joe Martin Fitness LLC. Very creative. It's almost as fancy as your name, right? Came up with that myself. No consulting or anything like that. Just came up with myself. So I'm a pretty awesome story too, right there. So I didn't get any confirmation how awesome I was going in the right direction, but it worked out for me too. So, so you help women with a lot of range of health issues. What's kind of some of the most common ones that you see prop up that you help people with?
Yeah, so probably I see a lot of frozen shoulder in women like 45 to 55. I see a lot of scoliosis. I see a lot of inflammatory diseases like fibromyalgia. Um, I see a lot of people who have had hip surgery, knee surgery, various surgeries on different parts. They've done PT and they're like, it's still just not right. Something's not right. And they're experiencing this long-term pain. Let's see, probably also like lots of neck and shoulder tension. And neck and shoulder tension is actually directly related to pelvic floor dysfunction. So I see a lot of that. Probably also one of the most prevalent things is life changes. So I get a lot of people come to see me because they've had a death in the family, or they've had a divorce, maybe empty nest syndrome. They're like, what do I do with my life now that my kids aren't in it? And retirement, like, okay, I have all this time, now what?
Yeah.
And so kind of just working through lifestyle changes as life kind of revolves around you.
Wow. Do you find it's more stuff like that or physical things that are causing these? What do you see as the cause of a lot of these?
Well, I think, to be honest, a lot of it is stress and anxiety. And we live very stressful lives. We're very busy. We take very little time to take care of ourselves. And especially, in my women generally put all themselves last every time. And so eventually the body just starts to give you physical pain to get you to recognize, hey, we need to do something about this. You need to either stop or change your behavior, or there's going to be damage. And I think a lot of people think because they have physical pain that there's something physically wrong with them, and pain is never solely physical. There's always the mental and emotional component. So you can get your steroid shots, you can go to surgery, you can take a pill, but again, you're just covering up the root, or you're covering up the root of the problem with a band-aid, and you're not really getting to the story. And so with yoga therapy, it's really about listening to the person's story, understanding what all's going on. And almost always, when you ask the person, well, when did this pain start? There is some emotional or mental or traumatic event that happened at the time frame of that onset. And really, I think it's just, again, the body's way of saying, hey, pay attention to me. You keep pushing through, you keep ignoring, and this isn't working for you anymore.
Yeah, because so many of us are just red line with stress at all times. We're not sleeping, our nutrition's not great. But I'm doing my workouts, I'm doing all the other things, but then all these other things come conspire against you. So, okay, gentlemen, if you're listening right now, you buckle up. All right, we're gonna get into some stuff right now. Hey, just soldier on. You're gonna be okay. Put on your big boy pants. You can learn from this as well. So, how can women identify pelvic floor dysfunction? I know that's one of your kind of things you love to help people with. So, how can they identify it first? You mentioned a little bit from the neck and shoulder, which is interesting to me, how that can cause it.
Yeah, so over 30 million women in North America actually have pelvic floor dysfunction, and it's often misdiagnosed because we go to a specialist for this, that, and the other, and they're not making the pelvic floor connection. So one of the things is understanding that we have two types of pelvic floor dysfunction. There's hypertonic and there's hypotonic, much like hyperthyroid, hypothyroid. And hyper means the muscles of the pelvic floor are tight and weak. So they're overly working, overly contracted, much like our neck and shoulders and jaw when we're stressed, when we're anxious, when we're on computers all the time in this forward position, internally rotating of the shoulders, holding the shoulders up. And so when we're overly tight and weak, we can experience things like interstitial cystitis. That's a mouthful, but it's like bladder conditions, inflammatory diseases in the women parts, incontinence. You might have like tight hamstrings, hip flexors, psoas, tight glutes even. And anybody who has like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, or digestive issues, a lot of times we go to a gastroenterologist, but that is a sign that there may be something going on in the pelvic floor. And so I guess like understanding that there are these two types, and with the second type is hypotonic, and hypotonic means that there's lax muscles, loose and weak. And so in hypotonic, we have like also incontinence or prolapse, where maybe the woman's had a hysterectomy or she's had some traumatic childbirths or even sexual trauma, and the organs actually fall out. So there's lack of tone there to hold everything up and in. A lot of times those people are also maybe overweight. They have like sedentary jobs. They don't get a lot of fitness or exercise. They might have like fibroids, different female conditions like that, where you're dealing with, again, inflammation in the cervix and the uterus, the vaginal wall. And so prevention and care for something like that would be to, I guess, understand the anatomy of the pelvis and what you've got going on down there, but also understanding that the diaphragm and pelvic floor actually work together. So if we're breathing, because we're in the sympathetic nervous system, this state of like anxiety and stress all the time, that the breath is very shallow. It's up here, and we're chest breathers. We're not really breathing down into the lower half of the body, into the pelvis, into the belly. And so this short, shallow breathing actually creates a breathing dysfunction that kind of shuts off the connection of that movement of breath downward. So when that happens, we need to learn how to breathe again. We need to learn how to breathe properly to soften and to stretch the pelvic floor. And then I think a big part of what I do is pain. And so getting people to understand that pain science, pain education, like what happens to our bodies, our brains, when we live with pain that lasts more than 3 months, chronic. And once we understand that, then we aren't as fearful, I guess, or afraid of maybe taking an exercise class or doing something with you, for example, like where we might do a squat or something and feel like our pelvic floor is going to fall to the ground, you know. So having someone to teach you these things will help you so that you can continue to live a healthy lifestyle without experiencing a pain flare-up or fear that you're going to screw something up.
But yeah, that's it. So you mentioned breathing. What are some other things people can do to prevent kind of future problems once they get it identified?
Yeah, so when I work with people, a lot of things is teaching them how to relax it, because even if you don't have a hypertonic floor, a pelvic floor that's tight and weak, is understanding that if we breathe more fully, we can actually relax and stretch the pelvic floor, which is what we need before we ever do any kind of strengthening like Kegels, or being able to, when I teach someone, I teach reverse Kegels before I teach them anything about Kegels or strengthening. because we need to first create awareness with the pelvic floor. I think a lot of people in our society like don't talk about girl stuff, don't talk about all those things, those symptoms that you're having. And so we're shied away from it. It becomes private. And so we just kind of hush hush, And so coming back into the body, having awareness of the pelvic floor, understanding your anatomy and learning to be able to soften it, recognize what's happening down there, have a connection with it where you can kind of feel when you're strengthening, you can feel when it's relaxed. And once you make that identification, then doing all the other things becomes much easier. You have much more confidence that when you go to a fitness class, you're not going to hurt yourself.
Yeah, that's it. Well, you brought them up. So Kegels, let's get into it. Why not, right? So I'm honest. I've been training women for 14 years, so I'm immune at this point. But when I first started, man, my face stayed red, my ears stayed red because they would try to embarrass me on purpose. I can't blame them. I probably have done the same thing. But at this point, I'm bulletproof. So let's talk about Kegels. So first of all, what are they? Let's start with there. What are Kegels? People may have heard of them, but what are they?
Yeah, so a man actually named Dr. Arnold Kegel created Kegels for women in the situation of being able to build a tighter pelvic floor. So you would have more pleasure during intercourse so that you could cure things like incontinence, which is peeing when you laugh or jump. And then prolapse, which is where organs start to fall out of the body. And so the idea is that you're clenching or contracting the muscles of the pelvic floor and pulling them up and in. Kegels, I think, are misunderstood. So I've had a slew of people who have had hysterectomies or they've had surgery for endometriosis or fibroids, cysts, and they come in and they're like, well, the doctor just told me to do Kegels, but I'm still experiencing pain. And Kegels actually, a lot of the times they're just kind of like this thing that people have heard about, but they don't really know how to do them, how many to do. And so without that education, a doctor just telling someone to go home and do your Kegels, have happy surgery, have a good time, isn't enough. We don't understand enough about our anatomy and we don't understand the process. And so educating people about Kegels is really about saying, well, how many are you doing? How are you doing them? Once you have that conversation, you realize people aren't doing them correctly and they're doing way too many. If we already are a stressful, anxious society, and we're carrying a lot of tension here all the time in general, we have very poor posture, we're sitting over our devices all the time. This is being reflected in the pelvic floor. And so if you're going to go home and do a bunch of Kegels because your doctor told you to, I think we're overly tightening muscles that are already stressed and tightened. So I don't even teach Kegels until people understand awareness and can feel their breath in the pelvic floor and can understand how to stretch it and soften it and relax it. Then we go into Kegels, and it's there are actually slow and fast twitch fibers in the pelvic floor. So I'm sure as a fitness person, you've heard about slow and fast twitch muscles, and you have different ways of training them. Well, the pelvic floor is a muscle. There are many muscles, and it's just the same, right? We have to address both the slow and the fast twitch with different pressure and different contraction. So to simplify, I guess, if you wanted to know what a Kegel is, it's really using the muscles that you use to stop the flow of urine. So if you need to hold your pee, those muscles that you squeeze, that's kind of in simple form doing a Kegel exercise.
I mean, you make a great point because like doctors will say, well, you should go exercise and eat right. Well, if they knew what that looked like, they would probably be doing that, right? So there's no specific instructions on, hey, go walk for 30 minutes or do weight training, whatever it is. So more specific is better. And learning how to do them. Maybe they don't know how to exercise. Maybe they don't know how to eat right. So that's great a point about yours. So what's a good starting number once they know how to and they know how to do them, all that good stuff? What's kind of a good number you like to start people with?
Well, in my training, like in that I would do for like a pelvic floor class, several weeks or sometimes even months, depending on the woman in training, we would only do like 10 Kegels. So it's very minimal, but it's done mindfully. So slow twitch fibers, you would do slow Kegels, and fast twitch, you would do fast Kegels. But I would never encourage anyone to do more than 10. And in fact, I think as a yoga teacher originally, who taught Ashtanga-based yoga, which is kind of intense, more of intense flow practice, a lot of the times we're cued in yoga class to actually lift the pelvic floor, which we call Mula Bandh. And we never cue to relax your pelvic floor. And part of the Mula Bandh, the lift of the pelvic floor in a yoga class, is to hold energy in this space, to keep the energy in the body, keep the warmth in the body, versus letting it relax. And unfortunately, I think people who practice yoga have very tight pelvic floors, including myself. And that tension that we have there, we're never taught to let it go. We're never taught to relax it. And it was actually in my yoga therapy training that I learned through a teacher in Arizona who focuses on pelvic floor, that there are pelvic floor PTs who can actually do internal exams and examine whether or not certain muscles of your pelvic floor are tight and certain muscles are loose. And so a pelvic floor yoga therapist or someone who knows that information can actually work alongside a pelvic floor PT who's done the internal exam to know, okay, these are the muscles that are weak. Then you can come into your yoga practice one-on-one and have that specific muscle group as your focus. And we use different tools externally to do that, like squishy yoga balls. I have one sitting over here on the floor, like sitting on that, massaging it, and being able to sense as you put pressure down, sit in a seated position to feel those muscles specifically. And there are like 16 muscles in the pelvic floor. There are quite a few.
Wow.
So, and as you know, the body is complicated, right? We've got a lot of different layers of muscles happening. We've got different nerves going into them. So everyone's experience with pelvic pain is going to be different. And this is why I chose like one-on-one approach to work with people, because there's power in knowing exactly what's going on with you and treating exactly what needs to be treated in your body.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk about this wellness retreat coming. We've kind of discussed some of the areas, but what's all this wellness retreat about? What's it about, and how can people get involved?
Yeah. So in addition to private one-on-one yoga therapy, I offer wellness retreats out in New Market, which is northeast of Huntsville, on the 20 acres that we have with the natural waterfall. And this is actually our studio space. I have it set up for a private session, but we can fit about 6 mats in here. So the retreats are very intimate. We get to know each other very well over the weekend. And my next wellness retreat is a women's wellness retreat focusing on the pelvic floor and pelvic issues. It is October 20th through the 22nd. And we start with yoga at 6 p.m. on Friday night. It's going to be kind of a restorative, relaxing yoga class, but also introductions, getting to know one another, and getting comfortable together. And then Saturday morning, we start with yoga, and we will talk a lot about the things that we're talking about here in this podcast, how to identify different issues, how to address these different issues in different bodies and different things that we have going on. Because it's a small environment, we can really kind of have that individualized approach for these people that show up. And then you have free time. So a variety of opportunity to either get a massage. You can do a steam room with light therapy, aromatherapy, and sound therapy. We've got, of course, hike to the waterfall. Hopefully we've gotten plenty of rain then, and it's running nice and fruitfully. Lots of places to hang out on the property and to integrate what you're learning, journal, meditate, breathe. We also have lunch and dinner catered in on Saturday. So your meals are provided in the cost. And then opportunity to have little private sessions with me if there's an issue that you're specifically working on that you want a little bit of advice on, like where do I go from here, or something, you have that private time with me if you choose. And then an evening yoga class. So we kind of close out Saturday with, again, a different type of practice, very somatic. So being able to tune in and take time to feel what's happening in the body through different movements, through different breath and meditation practices. And then Sunday morning, we close in the morning with a yoga class and a little closing ceremony. Last time I did a retreat, we closed on the labyrinth out front and on the property. So we took a walk around the labyrinth, kind of got into the zone and closed. But a lot of it's really just about learning self-care, learning how to take care of yourself in a safe and supportive environment with other women. And these are the kind of people that we might encourage to show up. So people who have had multiple childbirths or troubling childbirths, maybe some damage, traumatic issues, people who are in perimenopause and menopausal. So I want a wide array of women and wide array of experiences and age groups, because I think we can all learn from each other in our experiences. And there is a huge value in that, in a weekend long supportive environment of a retreat.
That sounds pretty awesome. So if someone's, hey, you're speaking to me right now, how do they sign up?
Yeah, so you can sign up on my website, waterfallyogallc.com. You can also find links to it on Facebook, Waterfall Yoga Therapy, Instagram. I am also on Insight Timer. So Insight Timer is the #1 meditation app that's free. And there's a lot of great people out there doing different types of meditation. So if you're curious about it, you can look up Waterfall Yoga Therapy on Insight Timer and take some free meditations. You can also find me on YouTube, and I've got the reverse Kegels that I was talking about in this podcast. There's a video on there of reverse Kegels as well, so you can kind of see what that looks like as a way to start that practice of becoming more aware of relaxing your pelvic floor.
Wow. Well, I know it wasn't really directed at me today, but I learned a lot today. So, like I said, I train women. This is very valuable information for me. So if you're listening right now, please share this episode. Somebody needs to hear the information that Sarah is sharing with us today. They need to hear about this retreat. I mean, you could change your life in one weekend. Imagine what you could do if you figure out how to do self-care. I mean, that's so important. If you could figure that out in a weekend, man, come on, you need that in your life. So please share this episode. Follow Sarah on the social media. I'll link all that in show notes. You can go to her website, all that good stuff. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us today.
Hey, you're welcome, Joe. And I will say, even though you're a man, men have pelvic floors too, and so do kids and babies. So just remember, even if your listener is a male, you also have a pelvic floor, and you also might have different things like erectile dysfunction, prostatitis, and other male conditions that are related to pelvic floor dysfunction. So,
all right, we got to do another episode now. So I got to have you back. I'll have you back. So, yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in. This is great information, Sarah. So like I said, go follow her, share this episode, and we will see you guys next week on the Relentless Positivity Podcast.